Where in the world, it is always on the alert, taking the mature opinions of the thinkers, and industriously seeking to improve upon them in its own peculiar way. If the reader wishes to study any subject, let him beware of rushing to the newest books upon it, and confining his attention to them alone, under the notion that science is always advancing, and that the old books have been drawn upon in the writing of the new. They have been drawn upon, it is true, but how? The writer of the new book often does not understand the old books thoroughly, and yet he is unwilling to take their exact words, so he bungles them, and says in his own bad way that which has been said very much better and more clearly by the old writers, who wrote from their own lively knowledge of the subject. The new writer frequently omits the best things they say, their most striking illustrations, their happiest remarks, because he does not see their value or feel how pregnant they are. The only thing that appeals to him is what is shallow and insipid. It often happens that an old and excellent book is ousted by new and bad ones, which, written for money, appear with an air of great pretension and much puffing on the part of friends. In science a man tries to make his mark by bringing out something fresh. This often means nothing more than that he attacks some received theory which is quite correct, in order to make room for his own false notions. Sometimes the effort is successful for a time, and then a return is made to the old and true theory. These innovators are serious about nothing but their own precious self. It is this that they want to put forward, and the quick way of doing so, as they think, is to start a paradox. Their sterile heads take naturally to the path of negation, so they begin to deny truths that have long been admitted. The vital power, for example, the sympathetic nervous system, generatio equivoca, Bichet's distinction between the working of the passions and the working of intelligence, or else they want us to return to crass atomism, and the like. Hence it frequently happens that the course of science is retrogressive. To this class of writers belong those translators who not only translate their author but also correct and revise him, a proceeding which always seems to me impertinent. To such writers I say, write books yourself which are worth translating, and leave other people's works as they are. The reader should study, if he can, the real authors, the men who have founded and discovered things, or, at any rate, those who are recognized as the great masters in every branch of knowledge. Let him buy second-hand books rather than read their contents in new ones. To be sure, it is easy to add to any new discovery, inventus aliquid adire facile estate, and, therefore, the student, after well mastering the rudiments of his subject, will have to make himself acquainted with the more recent additions to the knowledge of it. And, in general, the following rule may be laid down here as elsewhere: if a thing is new, it is seldom good, because if it is good, it is only for a short time new. What the address is to a letter, the title should be to a book. In other words, its main object should be to bring the book to those amongst the public who will take an interest in its contents. It should, therefore, be expressive, and since by its very nature it must be short, it should be concise, laconic, pregnant, and if possible give the contents in one word. A prolix title is bad, and so is one that says nothing, or is obscure and ambiguous, or even, it may be, false and misleading. This last may possibly involve the book in the same fate as overtakes a wrongly addressed letter. The worst titles of all are those which have been stolen, those, I mean, which have already been borne by other books, for they are in the first place a plagiarism, and secondly the most convincing proof of a total lack of originality in the author. A man who has not enough originality to invent a new title for his book, will be still less able to give it new contents. Akin to these stolen titles are those which have been imitated, that is to say, stolen to the extent of one half. For instance, long after I had produced my treatise on Will in Nature, Ørsted wrote a book entitled On Mind in Nature. A book can never be anything more than the impress of its author's thoughts, and the value of these will lie either in the matter about which he has thought, or in the form which his thoughts take. In other words, what it is that he has thought about it. The matter of books is most various, and various also are the several excellences attaching to books on the score of their matter. By matter I mean everything that comes within the domain of actual experience, that is to say, the facts of history and the facts of nature, taken in and by themselves and in their widest sense. Here it is the thing treated of, which gives its peculiar character to the book, so that a book can be important, whoever it was that wrote it. But in regard to the form, the peculiar character of a book depends upon the person who wrote it. It may treat of matters which are accessible to everyone and well known, but it is the way in which they are treated, what it is that is thought about them, that gives the book its value, and this comes from its author. If, then, From this point of view, a book is excellent and beyond comparison. So is its author. It follows that if a writer is worth reading, his merit rises just in proportion as he owes little to his matter. Therefore, the better known and the more hackneyed this is, the greater he will be. The three great tragedians of Greece, for example, all worked at the same subject matter. So when a book is celebrated, care should be taken to note whether it is so on account of its matter or its form, and a distinction should be made accordingly. Books of great importance on account of their matter may proceed from very ordinary and shallow people, by the fact that they alone have had access to this matter. Books, for instance, which describe journeys in distant lands, rare natural phenomena, or experiments, or historical occurrences of which the writers were witnesses, or in connection with which they have spent much time and trouble in the research and special study of original documents. On the other hand, where the matter is accessible to everyone or very well known, everything will depend upon the form, and what it is that is thought about the matter will give the book all the value it possesses. Here only a really distinguished man will be able to produce anything worth reading, for the others will think nothing but what anyone else can think. They will just produce an impress of their own minds, but this is a print of which everyone possesses the original. However, the public is very much more concerned to have matter than form, and for this very reason it is deficient in any high degree of culture. The public shows its preference in this respect in the most laughable way when it comes to deal with poetry, for there it devotes much trouble to the task of tracking out the actual events or personal circumstances in the life of the poet which served as the occasion of his various works. Nay, these events and circumstances come in the end to be of greater importance than the works themselves, and rather than read Goethe himself, people prefer to read what has been written about him, and to study the legend of Faust more industriously than the drama of that name. And when Berger declared that people would write learned disquisitions on the question, who Leonora really was, we find this literally fulfilled in Goethe's case, for we now possess a great many learned disquisitions on Faust and the legend attaching to him. Study of this kind is, and remains, devoted to the material of the drama alone. To give such preference to the matter over the form, is as though a man were to take a fine Etruscan vase, not to admire its shape or coloring, but to make a chemical analysis of the clay and paint of which it is composed. The attempt to produce an effect by means of the material employed, an attempt which panders to this evil tendency of the public, is most to be condemned in branches of literature where any merit there may be lies expressly in the form, I mean, in poetical work. For all that, it is not rare to find bad dramatists trying to fill the house by means of the matter about which they write. For example, authors of this kind do not shrink from putting on the stage any man who is in any way celebrated, no matter whether his life may have been entirely devoid of dramatic incident, and sometimes, even, they do not wait until the persons immediately connected with him are dead. The distinction between matter and form to which I am here alluding also holds good of conversation. The chief qualities which enable a man to converse well are intelligence, discernment, wit and vivacity. These supply the form of conversation. But it is not long before attention has to be paid to the matter of which he speaks, in other words, the subjects about which it is possible to converse with him, his knowledge. If this is very small, his conversation will not be worth anything, unless he possesses the above-named formal qualities in a very exceptional degree, for he will have nothing to talk about but those facts of life and nature which everybody knows. It will be just the opposite, however, if a man is deficient in these formal qualities, but has an amount of knowledge which lends value to what he says. This value will then depend entirely upon the matter of his conversation, for, as the Spanish proverb has it, mas sabe el necio en su casa, que el sabio en la ajena, a fool knows more of his own business than a wise man does of others. On style. Style is the physiognomy of the mind, and a safer index to character than the face. To imitate another man's style is like wearing a mask, which, be it never so fine, is not long in arousing disgust and abhorrence, because it is lifeless, so that even the ugliest living face is better. Hence those who write in Latin and copy the manner of ancient authors, may be said to speak through a mask. The reader, it is true, hears what they say, but he cannot observe their physiognomy too, he cannot see their style. With the Latin works of writers who think for themselves, the case is different, and their style is visible. Writers, I mean, who have not condescended to any sort of imitation, such as Scotus Erigena, Petrarch, Bacon, Descartes, Spinoza, and many others. An affectation in style is like making grimaces. Further, The language in which a man writes is the physiognomy of the nation to which he belongs, and here there are many hard and fast differences, beginning from the language of the Greeks, down to that of the Caribbean islanders. To form a provincial estimate of the value of a writer's productions, it is not directly necessary to know the subject on which he has thought, or what it is that he has said about it. That would imply a perusal of all his works. It will be enough, in the main, to know how he has thought. This, which means the essential temper or general quality of his mind, may be precisely determined by his style. A man's style shows the formal nature of all his thoughts, the formal nature which can never change, be the subject or the character of his thoughts what it may. It is, as it were, the dough out of which all the contents of his mind are kneaded. When Eulenspiegel was asked how long it would take to walk to the next village, he gave the seemingly incongruous answer, walk. He wanted to find out by the man's pace the distance he would cover in a given time. In the same way, when I have read a few pages of an author, I know fairly well how far he can bring me. Every mediocre writer tries to mask his own natural style, because in his heart he knows the truth of what I am saying. He is thus forced, at the outset, to give up any attempt at being frank or knave, a privilege which is thereby reserved for superior minds, conscious of their own worth, and therefore sure of themselves. What I mean is that these everyday writers are absolutely unable to resolve upon writing just as they think, because they have a notion that, were they to do so, their work might possibly look very childish and simple. For all that, it would not be without its value. If they would only go honestly to work, and say, quite simply, the things they have really thought, and just as they have thought them, these writers would be readable and, within their own proper sphere, even instructive. But instead of that, they try to make the reader believe that their thoughts have gone much further and deeper than is really the case. They say what they have to say in long sentences that wind about in a forced and unnatural way. They coin new words and write prolix periods which go round and round the thought and wrap it up in a sort of disguise. They tremble between the two separate aims of communicating what they want to say and of concealing it. Their object is to dress it up so that it may look learned or deep, in order to give people the impression that there is very much more in it than for the moment meets the eye. They either jot down their thoughts bit by bit, in short, ambiguous, and paradoxical sentences, which apparently mean much more than they say. Of this kind of writing Schelling's treatises on natural philosophy are a splendid instance, or else they hold forth with a deluge of words and the most intolerable diffusiveness, as though no end of fuss were necessary to make the reader understand the deep meaning of their sentences. Whereas it is some quite simple if not actually trivial idea, examples of which may be found in plenty in the popular works of Fichte, and the philosophical manuals of 100 other miserable dunces not worth mentioning. Or, again, they try to write in some particular style which they have been pleased to take up and think very grand, a style, for example, par excellence profound and scientific, where the reader is tormented to death by the narcotic effect of long spin periods without a single idea in them, such as are furnished in a special measure by those most impudent of all mortals, the Hegelians. Or it may be that it is an intellectual style they have striven after, where it seems as though their object were to go crazy altogether, and so on in many other cases. All these endeavors to put off the nascent or ridiculous mouche, to avoid showing the funny little creature that is born after such mighty throes, often make it difficult to know what it is that they really mean. And then, too, they write down words, nay, even whole sentences, without attaching any meaning to them themselves, but in the hope that someone else will get sense out of them. And what is at the bottom of all this? Nothing but the untiring effort to sell words for thoughts, a mode of merchandise that is always trying to make fresh openings for itself, and by means of odd expressions, turns of phrase, and combinations of every sort, whether new or used in a new sense, to produce the appearance of intellect in order to make up for the very painfully felt lack of it. It is amusing to see how writers with this object in view will attempt first one mannerism and then another, as though they were putting on the mask of intellect. This mask may possibly deceive the inexperienced for a while, until it is seen to be a dead thing, with no life in it at all. It is then laughed at and exchanged for another. Such an author will at one moment write in a dithyrambic vein, as though he were tipsy, at another, nay, on the very next page, he will be pompous, severe, profoundly learned and prolix, stumbling on in the most cumbrous way and chopping up everything very small, like the late Christian Wolff, only in a modern dress. Longest of all lasts the mask of unintelligibility, but this is only in Germany, whither it was introduced by Fichte, perfected by Schelling, and carried to its highest pitch in hate.